So then what now that the peace deal was, the meeting between Putin and Trump was cancelled? What happens next?
Ukrainians will die. Russians will advance. The Ukrainian economy will be destroyed. Ukrainian energy infrastructure will be annihilated. We're going to roll into this winter. Russia has always taken it easy. One of the big criticisms of Vladimir Putin and the Russian general staff by, the chattering class in Russia is that, why do you let the Ukrainians have heat during winter? Russia's always had the potential. They said, look, this is what we can do, is putting pressure, but they always backed off. Right now, there's no backing off. When winter rolls in, when it gets cold, Ukraine won't be able to heat itself, and you will see a nation collapse. There's no gas, there's no heat, there's no electricity, there's no running water, and the nation will die because of this. And again, you can thank Donald Trump, and you can thank Scott Bessent, you can thank Marco Rubio, you can thank all these people that didn't understand the inevitability of the Russian victory, and they put Ukraine in this situation. And when the Ukrainian civilians start freezing, they'll start fleeing to a Europe that doesn't want them. Right now, Europe's trying to return Ukrainians to Ukraine. What happens when you get 5, 6, 10 million people freezing to death on the border saying, let us in, help us survive? This is the future of Ukraine. It's not a pretty future. It's an ugly future.
Trump likes to make fun of the fact that Russia was not able to capture Kiev, showing how they're failing in this war and how Ukraine has the advantage. Now, that's part of the negotiating tactic, goes back and forth. Ukraine's going to lose, Russia's going to lose, depending on what's happening in the negotiations. But what do you say to that argument that, Russia, well, I mentioned the point earlier, they haven't captured Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Donbass, war of attrition, but they've also had to withdraw from Kiev and give up
They
on
didn't
the...
have to withdraw from Kiev. I mean, again, this is just an absurdity. It's not reflective of the facts. The Russians had installed a superior military position around Kiev. Kiev is a city of, millions of people. And the amount of troops around Kiev was in the tens of thousands. You don't go into a city of millions with tens of thousands of troops. Russia was simply getting Ukraine to the negotiating table. Part of the Istanbul communique that nobody talks about is that Russia said, we will withdraw from Kiev. We will withdraw from Chernihiv, from Sumy, from Kharkov. And as a sign of our good faith, they withdrew, not because Ukraine beat them. They withdrew because they said, we're going to withdraw because we want peace. We want this war to end. You signed this Istanbul communique. You agreed to no NATO. You agreed to reducing your military. You agreed to some other things, and we're out of here. We're not.
But that hasn't been. But that wasn't signed. What would they pull out before it was signed? Because we did see those videos of the tanks being, there was a big line of tanks driving into Kiev, stuck, and then being hit by drones and rockets.
There was a big line of tanks, not stuck, but stopped. There was one battle in the northern suburbs of Kiev where a single Russian convoy was engaged by Ukrainians with artillery and with close-in fire support and took some casualties. Welcome to urban warfare. No one said that this was a cakewalk for the Russians. And the Ukrainians are brave fighters, and they put up very effective resistance. And so, you can show a video of a Russian convoy getting smacked, but that's like showing a video of American troops. The North Vietnamese have a lot of videos of U.S. Marines walking into ambushes in Vietnam. And it's ugly to watch Marines die. It's ugly to see that happen. But every tactical engagement ended with a Marine victory because we adapted, reinforced, came back, and slaughtered the North Koreans. And took the hill and then gave the hill up again. Vietnam was a crazy war. But the point is, the Ukrainians did inflict casualties on the Russians. There's no doubt about that. No one's denying that. But the notion that you take one video showing a successful Ukrainian ambush and apply that to the totality of the conflict is absurd in the extreme. The Russians withdrew from Kiev as a good faith measure to show the Ukrainian government, which was doubtful, that if they agreed to this, that Russia would give up the territory. Russia said, look, we'll withdraw from Kiev. We'll withdraw from Chernihiv. We'll withdraw from Sumy. Where they were in the process of withdrawing from Kharkov when the Ukrainians attacked. That big advance that they had. You want to know why they advanced? Because Ukraine stabbed the Russians in the back, and they laugh about it. They laugh about it. We led the Russians on, believing that we would eventually come back to the table. And they launched this attack thinking they would break the Russians. They didn't break the Russians. The Russians simply solidified the line, mobilized 300,000 men, and now where we're at, 36-1 kill ratio.
there's also been those drone incursions. No one's talking about them at the moment. They've stopped. But there was a lot of talk back then of a potential conflict between NATO and Russia. And you've kind of hinted at escalation if the Tomahawk missiles were provided to Ukraine as well. Without fear-mongering, do you think we are close to a situation where NATO and Russia could end up in direct conflict?
Look,
I know both sides don't want it. Both sides don't want it, I think. I think we both agree on that.
Nobody
things do happen in times of war.
I would say we always have to be aware of the potential of this. One of the dangers is that the Ukraine conflict has become literally a proxy conflict between the West and Russia. And as Ukrainian resources get drained, there will be a temptation to replace these resources with European resources. Already, it's underreported, but the number of Poles fighting this conflict is outrageous. The Russians have said that when they monitor, you see it. There's a book that's out about it's written from the Russian perspective, interviews of soldiers, and they keep saying well, we were fighting the Poles that day. You say, what do you mean the Poles? Well, the radio traffic, everybody was speaking Polish, and I'm not talking about Western Ukrainian slang. I'm talking about Polish. There's entire Polish units there. There are entire units of, under Western leadership of South American mercenaries. More and more, you're seeing the Ukrainian army turning to non-Ukrainian manpower resources to make up for the insufficiency of their own manpower deficit. And at some point in time, there may be a temptation to insert a British unit or a French unit or something of that nature. And then when they die, as they will, I'm just here to tell you, Mario, no Ukrainian unit survives long on the battlefield. Even their elite units, when they get sent in for the counterattack, get rotated out as quick as possible because once the Russians take control of the battlefield, they kill everybody. And so the elite units pull back and they put in the territorials, and the territorials get slaughtered, and the elite units go back and to their whores and their whiskey and their money and their food until the next time they're called in to do this. The Ukrainian army is just meat for the ground. There's some brave soldiers. Look, the Russians say they're brave. There's a famous story out of Bakhmut where Wagner surrounded a Ukrainian unit in a bunker and said, "Surrender, brothers. You fought bravely. We're not going to kill you. We'll treat you well." And the Ukrainians shouted back, "Russians don't surrender." And that's a famous line from the Second World War, where the Germans had surrounded a Russian soldier and told him to surrender. He said, "Russians don't surrender," and they didn't. It means that the Ukrainians and the Russians are the same damn people. They're the same people. As hard as the Russians fight, the Ukrainians fight. There's no doubt about that. The Russians respect their Ukrainian opponents. They understand the tenacity. But the Russians have built an algorithm of conflict, which is to the detriment of the Ukraine. The Ukrainians have bought into a Western style of war that doesn't care about them. If we did care about them, why would we let them do the 2023 summer counteroffensive, which was designed in Grafenwehr by a bunch of NATO idiots, where we just let the Ukrainians go in and get slaughtered in frontal attacks against a prepared Russian defense? Why did we encourage them to go into Kursk and sacrifice 76,000 Ukrainian soldiers for a political gesture that got them nothing but dead soldiers? We don't care about them, and we've organized them to fight a war that they can't win, and it's a tragedy.
There's a last question. I'll take it from the comments here, and it's discussing the advancements. Do you think Russia's advances were stronger when Prigozhin and Wagner were around?
No, there were Prigozhin and Wagner had a unique role in this war. They, let's just get down to technicalities. Russia legally was not allowed to provide military support to deploy Russian soldiers on the soil of either Donetsk and Lugansk. They were, first of all, they're part of Ukrainian territory until they declared independence. Then they became an independent entity. And without the approval of parliament, the Duma, Russian troops can't be deployed on these territories legally. So what Wagner did is provided a vehicle for Russia to surge military capability into Lugansk to support the Lugansk People's Republic military formations, and also Donetsk. So Wagner was a private military company that operated with the full permission of the Russian government. I mean, and they received a lot of money and a lot of resources, and they were very effective. And in September of 2022, though, when Donetsk and Lugansk, through the referendum, became part of Russian territory, Wagner was told, you're going to have to convert to the Russian military legally. You can't continue to exist. We will honor what the Russian government said. We will honor the 1-year contract, because in May of 2022, they signed a 1-year contract with Wagner that expired in May of 2023. We'll honor this contract, but by the time May 2023 comes, your soldiers either have to go home or sign contracts with the Russian Ministry of Defense. And Prigozhin decided that he was going to make some money. He said, no, I got a money-making machine here. I don't want to give this up. And so he started this legend of Wagner supremacy. He started, criticizing Shoigu and Gerasimov and the Russian military and the Russian way of fighting.
It's crazy times.
Understand that Prigozhin fought in Lugansk, but the Russian military fought everywhere else and was doing quite well. The Akhmat Special Forces came to Lugansk, and they partnered with Wagner, fought side by side with them. I know Abdi Aladinov very well. He's the commander of the Akhmat Special Forces, and he has spoken, in high regard of Wagner and initially of Prigozhin. But he said at one point in time, he said it's very important to understand this, that the needs of Russia come before everything. And Prigozhin forgot that. Prigozhin put the needs of Prigozhin ahead of Russia, and that didn't go over well. They fought a very effective war. There's the twin cities of Soledar and Bakhmut. They both had very extensive fortifications, underground tunnels, etc. And Wagner launched a successful battle for Soledar.